The rapidly growing smokehead was already spreading its ugly stain as Box 7251 was struck at 1:39 p.m. for a fire at 26 Bellflower Street, in the rig. Boston was incorporated as a town in 1630 and has one of the oldest established fire departments in the country. While it is only 49 square miles in area, it has over 100,000 buildings and an extremely high population density. Boston is an old city with narrow streets and lots of traffic. Just getting to the fire is always a challenge. At least 3 three-deckers were fully involved before the first due engine got water on the fire. The first alarm jakes were still filling their lines as the 5th alarm was transmitted at 1:46, 7 minutes after the box. For as long as anyone can remember, firemen in Boston have been called Jakes. The Dorchester area of Boston contains hundreds of wooden 3-decker homes. In the 1800s, when land was expensive and wood was cheap, these all-wood apartment houses were built by the thousands to house the European immigrants arriving to labor in Boston. Vertical lumber yards. The balloon-framed 3-deckers were a fire problem when they were built and have remained so for over 100 years. The last 3-decker was built in 1917, but there are thousands that are still in use and waiting to burn. Running between Dorchester Avenue and Boston Street, Bellflower Street, as well as Howell Street to the north and Dorset Street to the south, was lined with old 3-deckers.
We struck 5 alarms, which is the most we can get in Boston, called for all additional apparatus in emergency. We had to cut the fire off. It has about 10 or 12 3-deckers involved at the present time. It's a terrible conflagration. Ranging in from Dorset Street, along Dorset Drive, up as far as Boston Street.
Chief, one final question, because I know you're awfully busy out there. Do you have any idea at this time how it started?
No, I don't. It was an inferno when I arrived. We had a working fire, and Chief Green pulled a second, Chief Klaus pulled 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
How about any of your own men? How many of those have been?
A few of them hurt. There's 4 or 5 of them are hurt at present.
All right, Chief, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Right.
Pleasure.
Chief Flanagan of the Boston Fire Department.
Known fondly throughout the department as Fuzzy Flanagan, Chief Flanagan served briefly as Chief of Department. Shortly after his appointment, Chief Flanagan was struck and killed when he stopped to assist a woman whose car had broken down on the expressway.
This is one of the many firemen here at the scene receiving first aid from too much smoke as our Channel 5 camera continues to cover this general alarm blaze in Dorchester this afternoon.
It was a matter of pride that Boston firemen did not turn their helmets backwards to ward off the heat, or wear smoke masks outside. But Bellflower was no ordinary fire, and the smoke and heat were so intense that pride gave way to practicality. In 1964, Boston still had many 2-piece engine companies, each equipped with a pump and wagon. Most of the apparatus had been supplied by Mack, but there were also a reasonable number of Ward LaFrances and Maxims in service. Jumping from porch to porch, the fire races down the block. As the afternoon rush hour approached, the Boston police implemented the emergency evacuation plan and successfully got the commuters out of the city. The three-decker was designed to provide comfortable, affordable housing in a period before air conditioning, automobiles, or reliable public transportation. Containing 14 to 20 rooms on 3 floors, they have for years housed 3 frequently large families, 1 family on each floor. Packed tightly together, the three-deckers sheltered each other from the cold winter wind, and in the summer, the large open porches provided a cool escape from the summer heat. The fact that so many three-deckers continue to be occupied argues well for the soundness of the concept. From a fire standpoint, however, the three-decker is a disaster. All wood and covered with wood siding or combustible shingles, any fire inside the structure spreads rapidly, and the flames projecting from the windows immediately ignite adjacent structures. The open porches also provide an avenue for rapid fire extension. The firefighting strategy is straightforward. Get the people out and use heavy streams to cut off the spread of the fire. The highest alarm on the running card for each box was a 5th. When additional help was needed, the chief called fire alarm and asked for a special. Special alarms were struck for 5 extra Boston engines, then 4 more extra Boston engines, and at 2:04, mutual aid from 22 neighboring cities. The procession of injured firemen to the Boston City Hospital continues. Residents who have lost their homes line the sidewalks until urged by the police to move to safety. The absence of turnout coats had less to do with the weather than it had to do with the underfunding of the fire department by Boston. Firemen had to buy their own gear, and many elected to wear less expensive denim jackets. They also had to buy their own boots and gloves. The initial command of the Bellflower fire was held by Robert Greene, the District 6 Chief, who passed command to Deputy Chief Frederick Klaus when he arrived from Division Headquarters. It was Chief Klaus who radioed for the fifth alarm and then added, "We have a potential conflagration. Send me all available help." Acting Chief of Department John Clougarty, responding on the 5th, assumed command when he arrived on the scene. Interestingly enough, in addition to Fuzzy Flanagan, 2 other firefighters on the scene would also serve as Chief of Department. One was Chief Clougarty. The other, as told in 30 Years on the Line, was an off-duty Boston captain named Leo Stapleton, who just happened to be in the neighborhood. Stapleton hooked up with Engine 3 and worked the fire with Bob Clougarty, Chief Clougarty's son. Tragedy seemed to stalk the senior officers who commanded the Bellflower Street fire. Before the year was out, Chief Clougarty would lose his son, Robert, killed in the line of duty when a wall collapsed. The 5 Boston alarms and special calls brought 34 engines, 7 trucks, and the rescue company to the scene. The call for mutual aid brought 21 engines, 3 trucks, and the Lawrence Rescue Company to the fire, and an additional 24 engines and a truck to cover the empty Boston fire stations.